Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Wherever you are in the world, we appreciate you being with us right now. This is Lovey Life, a Dome podcast. Dome is a digital and bilingual media company specialized in law at the supranational level. So, for all news, comments, analyses related to law in Africa and in the rest of the world, go to our website dome-online.com and follow us on our social media platforms, the links of which are listed below. This, however, is neither a technical nor a political podcast. To be honest, sometimes it's barely a legal one. The only prerequisite needed is to have an open mind and 30 minutes or so to spare. We sometimes will have guests from everywhere around the world, and we will always be keen to hear your thoughts. We have a fantastic episode for you today, so please stay with us and weigh in while we argue the case. Love your life. People, winter is coming. Indulge me, I know it's a terrible pun, and I'm ashamed of it. The only redeeming part of it is that it also happens to be factually correct. If you live over the equator, the trees are losing their leaves, the air is becoming colder and colder, and you are losing light a little bit more every day. For some of you, it's your favorite season of the year, and for others, it is dreadful. Whichever is your natural inclination, this winter seems more uncertain and gloomier than the previous ones in recent memories, due to many reasons. The cost of living crisis, for one, and it is certainly compounded with the general state of affairs. It seems that whenever one is turning on the news, there is a new catastrophe, either natural or man-made. The war in the Ukraine has been dominating the news for 9 months now, ever since Russia decided to enter a sovereign and neighboring country, using as a justification or pretext the treatment of pro-Russian populations in certain regions of the country. The world at large is dealing with the consequences of this operation. Since Russia's move in February 2022, exports of grain from the Ukraine, as well as fertilizers from Russia, have been significantly hit. The disruption in supplies pushed soaring prices even higher and contributed to a global food crisis, especially in lower-income countries. Indeed, before the war, the Ukraine used to produce and export 45 million tons of grain to the global market every year, but this year was unable to do so because it couldn't secure safe passage to and from Ukrainian ports, with land routes unable to compensate. Mountains of grain built up in silos were sitting in ships. In July 2022, however, both Russia and the Ukraine agreed to sign what is now known as the Black Sea Grain Initiative, whereby export from the Ukraine of grain, other foodstuff and fertilizers, including ammonia, were to resume through a safe maritime humanitarian corridor from 3 key Ukrainian ports. I'm going to butcher the name, please forgive me. Chornomorsk, Odessa, and Yuzhny Pivdeny to the rest of the world. To implement the deal, a joint coordination center was established in Istanbul, Turkey, comprising senior representatives of the Russian Federation, Turkey, the Ukraine, and the United Nations. The initiative was hailed as a relative success, with both countries cooperating. However, in a statement dated October 29, 2022, just a few days ago, Russia stated that it would suspend its participation to the initiative, citing as a reason a breach committed by the Ukraine. Specifically, Russia alleged drone attacks on its military fleet in the Black Sea to be a violation of the agreement. Ukrainian authorities have denied these allegations and vowed to continue to be bound by the initiative signed. And the other parties, the United Nations and Turkey, are trying to make Russia come back to the negotiation table and continue to enforce the agreement. So, that is fun. No one exactly knows where we're going with this in the next month. If you thought that this was all, well, by all means, let me be the bearer of bad news and disabuse you. Indeed, we still have not talked about the gas situation, especially in Europe. Things have been unsettled in that department for months. In fact, ever since the Russian and the Ukrainian conflict started back in February. The market hit an all-time high back in August when the Dutch title transfer facility, which is Europe's main benchmark for natural gas prices, recorded a maximum price of 340 euros per megawatt. The price have come down since, to be sure, predominantly because countries have taken their precaution and stored gas, but one can never tell exactly how far this will go and how long the supply will last. In such an instance, there is a general malaise and uncertainty about what the future holds. You see where we are. Now, turning to the solutions. The Ukraine has received help and/or support from almost every corner of the world. Citizens around the world expressed their solidarity with the Ukrainian people, and governments condemned Russia and vowed to help the Ukraine by providing humanitarian and/or military assistance. On the battlefield, the outcome of the issue is still undecided. Russia has first made a lot of progress, but then the Ukrainian factions have regained ground and retaken control of certain municipalities. The conflict seems, however, to have entered a new phase, with bombing in cities and sometimes residential areas in the Ukraine, while Russia has suffered losses both in personnel and in gears. And, as a symbol perhaps, the Crimea Bridge was also bombed. But of course, the battlefield is not only on the ground. There are two aspects of the question that are almost, if not equally, important. There is a political aspect, and the one that is of course of interest to us, the legal one. But, because we are trying to be exhaustive yet concise, we need to say a word or two about the international response to it. To put it quite plainly, the international community, which is a term that is always used in these circumstances, whatever that means, condemned Russia's attacks. The European countries have certainly taken the lead in that regard, as it is after all on their soil that the war is happening. The European Union has firmly backed the Zelensky administration and assured the Ukrainian population and government of their support. This has taken various forms: entertaining the Ukraine desire to join its institutions, harboring the refugees that could no longer stay in their home country, sending military and defense gear to help the Ukrainian soldiers, taking financial sanctions and placing embargoes on certain Russian products, or asking Russian citizens to essentially denounce their home country's policies. The European countries certainly went all in. The United States was also instrumental in sustaining the war effort from the Ukrainian, and help packages have been sent many a time. NATO has also indicated that in certain circumstances, most notably nuclear circumstances, they would intervene. Let's all hope and pray that we don't have to get to that, because as it has been stated, the worst peace is always better than the best war. Let's now turn to the legal part of the situation. Because of course, well, this is the whole reason this podcast exists. There is a score of legal issues that the conflict in the Ukraine raises. At the international level, 2 resolutions have been voted by the United Nations General Assembly, condemning the military operations of Russia and asking its president to withdraw its troops. Both resolutions have passed, but it is important to note that abstention was higher than what was anticipated, with sometimes 35 countries refusing to either condemn or back Russia. Also, it is important to note that resolutions do not have, obviously, the same legal strength and gravitas than treaties, of course. So, those resolutions may have been symbolically very important, but perhaps not legally really relevant. Another issue that needs to be addressed is the question of the vetoes of the permanent members of the Security Council of the United Nations. Obviously, Russia is using its veto to block resolutions that are not favorable to him. So that's an issue. But to be fair to Russia, it is not the first country to have used this power to further their own causes or their allies' causes. Make of that what you will. The Ukraine immediately decided to take legal actions and file an application instituting proceedings, as well as a request for the indication of provisional measures before the International Court of Justice, which is the judicial arm of the United Nations, obviously. The summary of the argument and the full text of the decision is, of course, available on DOM's website, dome-online.com. As a brief summary, however, we can say that the Ukraine alleges violation of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, to which both countries, the Ukraine and Russia, are parties. Indeed, the Ukraine contends that the allegations of genocide perpetrated against the pro-Russian populations of Donetsk and Luhansk by the government of Ukraine have no factual basis whatsoever and only served as a justification for the special military operation launched by Russia. This would constitute a crime of aggression within the meaning of international law. Ukraine claims that the actions of the Russian military against civilian populations are in direct violation of Russia's commitments to the Convention Against Genocide. The Ukraine asked the International Court of Justice to order that the Russian Federation immediately suspend the military operations commenced on February 24, 2022, that the Russian Federation immediately ensure that any military or irregular armed unit which may be directed or supported by it, as well as any organizations and persons which may be subject to its control, direction, or influence, take no steps in furtherance of the military operations. The country also asked the ICJ to order the Russian Federation to refrain from any action and to provide assurances that no action is taken that may aggravate or extend the dispute that is subject to this application. Public hearings regarding this request were held on March the 7th, 2022, despite the fact that the defendant state did not participate in the oral proceedings, although it was obviously invited to do so. Russia, however, sent a letter outlining the position of its government, in which it argued that the court lacked jurisdiction to hear this matter and most certainly to order provisional measures. The International Court of Justice delivered its order on March the 16th, 2022, for the indication of provisional measures and emphasized that Russia's non-participation had no bearing on the validity of its decision. As an aside, by the way, those are not normal timelines for the International Court of Justice or indeed for any tribunal. International tribunal, I mean. It is shockingly quick for the International Court of Justice to render any kind of decision in less than 3 weeks, even when there are provisional measures requested. This just goes to show you how important the matter was and how vital a minute could be in that circumstance. To come back to the order, the court called on the Federation of Russia to immediately suspend its operation in the territory of the Ukraine. Furthermore, the defendant state should ensure that any military or irregular armed unit under its control or authority takes no step in furtherance of the military operations object to these proceedings. Finally, both parties must refrain from any action that could aggravate or extend the dispute or make it more difficult to resolve. This was in March. We are approaching November, and the fighting still continues. So the third legal issue we need to draw one's attention to is the fact that usually the decisions of tribunals are mandatory, not optional, and that the fact that any country decides to willfully ignore a ruling is deeply concerning for the rule of law. It is, of course, one of the big differences in the administration of justice between individuals and states. You or I have very little chance to avoid serving our sentence or paying the damage that we owe, but, we're not states. Another important milestone from the point of view of international law was the referendum held in September regarding the annexation of 4 regions of the Ukraine. Now, this referendum was called a sham by just about anyone that is not a Russian official. The General Secretary of the UN stated that Russia's plan to annex these regions would be illegal, a violation of international law, and should be condemned. It also encouraged all countries not to recognize this annexation. So, this is going to be moving forward a very live issue because, for example, North Korea recognized the independence of the 4 regions. So, I think the relationships between the Ukraine and North Korea might be a bit frisky for the foreseeable future. And this will most certainly have an impact on treaties and bilateral relations moving forward. Finally, we need to mention that the International Criminal Court has opened an investigation for war crimes and crimes against humanity. It is interesting to note that the crime of aggression is not listed in this investigation. The crime of aggression is defined under the Rome Statute as the planning, preparation, initiation, or execution by a person in a position effectively to exercise control over or to direct the political or military action of a state, of an act of aggression which, by its character, gravity, and scale, constitutes a manifest violation of the Charter of the United Nations. For the purposes of this article, act of aggression means the use of armed forces by a state against the sovereignty, territorial integrity, or political independence of another state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the Charter of the United Nations. As it stands, this article of the Rome Statute is not yet applicable, so Russian officials cannot be tried for this offense if it is alleged and proven. But there also are some dispositions in the 1949 Geneva Convention that may be actionable provided that the relevant conditions are, of course, met. We will have to wait and see what the future holds from a legal point of view. In the meantime, we can only pray for a return of peace, there and everywhere. Thank you so much for being with us today. I want to hear what you have to say. Does it make sense? Does it not? Do you have any comments, questions? Leave a comment below the link of the episode on our social media platforms using the hashtag LoviLife. The transcript of the program will be available on Doom's website in both French and English. If you have enjoyed this episode, please consider liking, sharing it, and subscribing to the show. We have had some great episodes previously, and we would be very grateful if you would consider listening to them. We will be back with our next episode next Wednesday. In the meantime, please stay safe and take care of yourself.